We're talking with Tom Rashid, who is the Associate Director of the Mhsa'a and also a member of the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association Hall of Fame. And first of all, thank you for taking the time.
Well, thanks for doing this, Greg. It's a good project. And I am not worthy to be in the Hall of Fame, but I didn't want to hurt those guys' feelings and defer it, so I'm honored that they've allowed me in.
Tom, we've started all the conversations with, maybe you could just give us a little history on where Tom started, where you grew up. And
well, I'm a Dearborn native. For 47 years, I went to St. Alphonsus High School in Dearborn, which did not have a lacrosse team. Nobody had a lacrosse team back in those days, 1973. And I went to Eastern Michigan University for my undergraduate with a history major and a phys ed minor, and worked at my high school, St. Alphonsus, when I was in college, and then became the athletic director there in 1977, and was there for 7 years as the AD. Then I went to Riverview Gabriel Bouchard, and I was the athletic director there for about 3.5 years or so, 12 years altogether in schools, and then I started a 15-year stint as a director of the Catholic League in December of 1987. Then I was the assistant director to Walt Bazalevich, and then became the director in August of 1988.
Did you always want to do athletic administration, or was teaching part of that?
I was a teacher, and all I ever really wanted to be was a basketball coach. My hero was my athletic director basketball coach in high school, a man named Mike Guzza, who just passed away this past fall, and all I ever wanted to do was be a basketball coach. I was a terrible basketball coach. I was a jerk. I couldn't stop pounding the officials. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I really liked doing it. The kids and the parents, we got along great, but I was not a good coach. So I really wanted to be an athletic director, and right out of college, 4 years out of high school, I became the athletic director at Dearborn St. Alphonsus, which back then was Class B high school with 611 kids, and it was really cool to be that as a young man.
You and I are an age apart. I'm 64, but my question to you is that you got to point out that how many Catholic school teams in the 60s, early 70s? Was there 30, 35 Catholic schools?
Well, one time the Catholic League had 100 schools in it. Every Catholic parish had its own high school. It was standard operating procedure. And then, of course, that dwindled down, and there were a number of consolidated high schools that formed, like Bishop Foley, Riverview Gabriel Bouchard, Aquinas, Bishop Gallagher.
Hat was Notre Dame.
Notre Dame, well, Notre Dame was an order school run by the Marists, okay. But a lot of small Catholic high schools formed into larger ones, and then they had a series of closings in the mid '70s when Proposal C was defeated, and so it went. When I took over the Catholic League, there was 50-some, and I think now there's 30-some, and the Catholic League does a very good job. They've got other non-public schools that are not Catholic, Cranbrook, Lutheran schools. I'm sure I'm missing some, no offense. And they do things very well. It was a great experience, and the Catholic schools think I pick on them. The public schools think I let them get away with murder, so I'm right in the middle of the sweet spot, I guess, when it comes to what I do now.
You're like a sheriff in a small town. If you do your job correctly, at some point everybody's going to be mad at you.
That's about it, yeah. I mean, my position here, besides working with boys lacrosse, is I'm the point man on eligibility. All the staff deals with eligibility and the regulations, but it's my primary area, and I work with those sport directors as well. So a lot of times you're in the midst of controversy, and this, to get to your point about how I got here, in 2003 I started with the Mhsa'a as the associate director, and the one sport that I run is boys lacrosse. I also handle eligibility, as I said, and I prepare the executive committee agendas, which is the waiver board, when schools want to request a waiver. And the thing that I get to do that I probably enjoy the most is I do athletic director in-service programs. I go around the state and have face-to-face meetings with, we get somewhere between 500 and 600 ADs every year, so it's really pretty cool.
What makes your heart, when you get up in the morning, you're working obviously as a career working with young folks, student athletes, what makes your heart happy with that?
Well, I'll tell you the hard part about this is, and it took me many years to get over it, is you don't have the interaction with students that you have when you're a teacher or a coach, right, or a building athletic director. You realize that you're not working in a profit business enterprise, but you're working for the benefit of schools, students, families, and communities, and that makes me pleased. I have learned that and I don't know, this sounds boastful, but I really do like helping people. And I pretty much, most of the day, it's assisting athletic directors, parents, coaches. Over the years, because I've been around so long, I've gotten to know the rules pretty well, and so I can interpret them in plain English. And so that really brings me, great satisfaction to be able to help people in school sports. I'm a firm believer in the valuable benefits of school sports. When they're in perspective, when they're done properly, they're outstanding. And a big part of my career has been to try to keep school sports in perspective. Let's not get it whacked out. We don't want to be like the colleges. We don't want to be like the pros. This is educational athletics. It's a vehicle, to take young men and make them better people, young women and make them better people. So that's really what we're all about.
I was finding it fascinating. If I used the travel rule as a sort of a litmus point, about half the states in the United States allow travel and the other half don't. Obviously, people who are educators and curriculum folks make those decisions rather than coaches, because that's probably has more understanding of it. And obviously, it's not a one way or the other, because it's a split conversation. And being fair, which is, I think, something that people don't always get about you as much as I have, because I think you're the fairest guy I've ever met, good or bad. I think that's kind of that process, and I think that's something that's unique.
Well, I'm an old Democrat, so I believe very much in an organization that's run by the people. And the Mhsaa is run by our schools. These athletic director in-service programs, you ever talk to an AD, ask them about those programs. And the ones who go to it will say, yeah, they're really pretty good. Because we sit there and we talk about the rules. And we have a lot of dialogue, a lot of input. It's not just me. I don't make the rules. I make the rules that the schools vote on. We have an elected council, and they're the ones who pass our rules. And we're constantly asking, should we change it? Should we adjust it? And our schools are saying they don't want to broaden it. In lacrosse, that was such a challenge because, one of the things that people have to realize about all the other sports in schools that are members of the Mhsaa, which are most, but not all the schools in the state are members, is that their foundation was with the Mhsaa. They were regulated, school, in a school, the only discipline that requires another school to exist is the athletic department. Even the band can exist without another school, because they can play a concert and fulfill their role. Right. But if you're the only lacrosse team in town,
you're stuck.
You're stuck. You got to have an opponent. And because of the nature of that, because it's competitive, because you must have another school to exist, several schools to exist, an organization like us serves to regulate those difficult things, that schools can't always agree on. And that's what we do. We run tournaments and we assist schools in eligibility. So very much in tune with our schools, talking about what the rules should be. Should they be changed? Should we increase it? Our schools pretty much tell us they don't want to go out beyond the travel rule that we have now. Interesting to note that there are about 8,000 teams that you can play under our current travel rule. You can play any team in Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, Ontario, or Illinois. Illinois was added to the list. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And of course, people say, well, why do you have that travel restriction? If your school is affluent and has the money, well, then that's no problem. Money's not the issue. So it's a matter of the haves and the have-nots trying to keep competitive equity. And we also have to remember that excessive travel takes away from the mission of school.
Right.
It takes away funds, it takes students out of class. So, as I said earlier, keep it in perspective. Let's have reasonable travel, and I think we do, and our schools are saying, no, our rule's pretty good right now, it's okay.
Well, I think your point of a changing organism based on its membership is what you've kind of suggested, which is true. there's a subset of rules that have to cover everybody. And then there's different rules that apply to various sports. Obviously, seating, for example, would be one of those rules that we use in lacrosse. That's one of the very first processes you guys discussed.
It was an interesting dilemma, an interesting story. It's really not a dilemma. When I first took over lacrosse, being the village SOB that everybody thought I was, I said, we're going to do this just like every other sport. You're going to have a district, we're going to get a host, we're not going to have this seating. And then I went to a meeting, and it was at Country Day. This is the year before we took it over. I was on the staff. We were, preparing to run the next tournament. And I watched the seating process. And I was like, this is good. This is not corrupt. It's a good system. I see how they're doing it, And so I changed my mind, which I think you have to do, And I pride myself on being able to keep an open mind. And I saw it, and I became a believer in how they did it in lacrosse. We had to make some adaptations to fit the family of sports here in this building with the MHSAA, and so we came up with this hybrid of let's set the regions, let's seed the teams, let's play most of the season, then put them on the bracket. And it's worked pretty well. It's not perfect. I think we're probably, if you look, it's probably 98% accurate as far as who's going to win the tournament. There's some good things about seeding. There's some bad things about seeding. Seeding is a kingmaker. One of the negative things about our sport is that there's only a handful of teams that get to the finals and the semifinals. And I don't like that. I'd like to see many schools experience the thrill of participating in a state final or a semifinal. And we have, a pretty good monopoly. Part of that is the nature of the sport, the history of the sport, the good youth programs that have been built up. When I worked in the Catholic League in Detroit, lacrosse was no secret. The CYO had, was running 7th and 8th, 6th and 7th and 8th grade lacrosse in many schools that feed the very successful programs in the metropolitan area there. So it's been a good experiment. Seeding has. It's not an experiment. I think it's here. And we keep changing it. I think one of the most exciting things we did was to change the structure of the tournament to double the number of regional winners. So that it's not, it used to be 4 teams won a regional, now it's 8 teams, and that's helped us with the expansion too.
You came here in 2003. Sport, when did it, I guess if we can start from the beginning, where did you get tucked into it? Because I know from talking with Bob Dowd and with talking with somebody else, they were the first conversation with Jack Roberts, who was then the executive director. How did you come into that discussion?
We began, the MHSAA, prior to my employment here, began looking at adding sports. And they added boys and girls bowling and boys and girls lacrosse at the same time. Boys and girls bowling started together in, I think, 2003-04, and then 2004-05 was the first school year for the boys and girls lacrosse tournament. We have a policy, the MHSAA, on adding new sports. And just today, as a matter of fact, I spoke with a woman who called and said, how come trap shooting isn't an MHSAA sport? And about once a month I get an email about why isn't bass fishing an MHSAA sport? Archery, badminton, equestrian. Games. Well, computer games is on the table being talked about, esports. So the MHSAA typically, when we're going to add a sport, we see there's two factors. One is, and again, it's our representative council that adds the sport. It's not the staff. It's the council that decides if they want to add it. They look for 64 teams
that
have it.
Okay.
So it's a good bracket.
Right.
And 64 schools that currently sponsor, and they want us to sponsor. And Bobby Dowd and Aaron Frank, who were the leaders of the sport back at the time, urged the MHSAA to get into lacrosse. It was getting big, and they saw the benefits of what we bring organizationally and otherwise to the sport. And so I think they gave them a 2-year head start. Interestingly enough, I was running the Catholic League at the time, and Mike Jolly of De La Salle came to me and said, what about the Catholic League sponsoring the lacrosse tournament? And it wasn't a Catholic League sport at the time. And I said, well, yeah, okay. So we sponsored 2 or 3 years ahead of the Mhsaa, the Catholic League sponsored boys lacrosse tournament, and it was pretty cool. And I can remember, Clark Bell, the assigner, and Graham Adams, and those guys were, were pioneers there. And I very much in debt to Bob Dowd and Aaron Frank for helping me. I didn't know lacrosse. Some say he still doesn't know lacrosse, and they might be right. To shepherd it along. How
did the program end up in your lap as associate director?
I don't know. I always said I thought Jack Roberts liked me, but when he gave me lacrosse, I kind of thought, I thought we were pals. I ran a pretty good program in the Catholic League, and I don't say that boastfully. It's a good athletic program, still is, and I'm proud that they do so well. So I knew what I was doing in the organization of athletic events, and I think one of the reasons that I was the nod as a new staff member was that there were a lot of non-public schools, and I had a history with non-public schools, and frankly, one of the things that I'm proudest of is that my reputation with public school administrators as a Catholic League guy was good. They trusted me, and they knew that I wasn't going to put up with any nonsense. And so I think part of my background in non-public school was why I was given it.
Was there anything in the beginning that kept you awake at night about lacrosse coming into the Mhsa family?
Well, I felt bad that there were so many coaches upset about the rules that other sports were living with that lacrosse didn't really want to live with. Right. Out-of-season coaching limit, the 4-player rule, which used to be a 3-player rule, the travel rule, the all-star and national high school prohibitions, all things that are scope and perspective rules that mainstream sports, for the most part, had accepted, but it was really hard for a lot of the lacrosse coaches to understand the reasons why. And of course, I wish I was more of a tactful guy, but I think people, I would try to explain it, the rationale behind it, and filling into the family of sports. But it was a real, and it still is a point of contention.
Do you think that some of that has to do with guys that coach lacrosse coach no other sports except lacrosse? And I think that's a generality, but
could be.
And the reason I'm saying is that I've coached other sports, and as a lacrosse coach, I knew what those restrictions and those rules were. Never thought twice about it. I'm a ski coach where travel is important because you've got to go
where the ice, where the snow is. Yeah,
you got to go to places.
I think that could be. But, the days have changed. When I went to high school, the same guy was the football. I shouldn't say when I went to high school, but yeah, in the 70s and 80s, and even earlier, you had a guy, everybody coached 2 or 3 sports. The football coach coached baseball, and basketball coach. I mean, I worked with a lot of guys who were 3-sport coaches. So I think you have that now. You have a lot of lacrosse coaches who only coach 1 sport. You have a lot of other coaches who only coach 1 sport. But it's probably more in lacrosse, and I never really thought of that. I think part of the difficulty with the transition was the distance, the years of history, where the lacrosse operated outside of the same rules that other school sports operated under. And I used to always joke, I said, yeah, you guys follow all of our rules except the travel rule, except the out-of-season coaching rule, except the 4-player rule. Yeah, you follow all of our rules. And I said, well, you didn't, and so there's some of that, and it bothers me to this extent personally. We're working with young people, and the last thing I want to ever do is set that example for a young person that it's okay to cheat, in the name of winning a stinking lacrosse game. And when guys step over the line, they think, well, it's okay because we're doing it for the team. Well, it's not okay. We're teaching kids dishonesty. And don't tell me those kids don't know when somebody's crossing over the line. They know, and their parents know, and they're sitting there going, well, that's okay because we're, 15-5 this year. Well, kill me. At what cost? We're in school sports. We're in education, dealing with young people. We're not going to fake, foul, and cheat. That's not appropriate. There's no place is it appropriate, but most of all, it's not appropriate in the setting of a young person's life.
Every time you mention athletics when you talk in a group, I've always watched you, it's always educational athletics, and I think we sometimes forget those two terms.
Yeah, school sports, we're different.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be different, you know? It's not a means to it, you know? It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle that teaches young people, you know. I was always pleased with the Catholic League motto that came up in my time, you know, more than good sports, good people. And we had good sports, you know. I spent a lot of years, and what schools will do to win a league title or a state title, imagine, you know, if the national title was out there, you know. So it's always a matter of keeping it in perspective.
We're coming up, I think, on season 15. Does that sound right?
You know, I think it is. It's 15th. Yeah, I believe so.
I pulled out one of the original first-year T-shirts
19.
that was the first annual. I still have that in my bottom drawer. The 15 years that we've done this, do you think things have changed?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think we've seen.
Maybe a better question: are you happy with where we're at with lacrosse?
Yes, for the most part, I am. I think the growth is good. We've gone from 64 teams to over double that, about 130 teams. I think they've made some good rule changes to help with safety. You know, concussion, of course, is overtaken, and appropriately so, hopefully, to improve the safety. But concussion is a factor in boys lacrosse, and I think they've made some rules. The rules that have helped. You know, a big part of our challenge has been with officials. The shortage of officials is really a problem.
And that's not changing.
Well, I tell you, I give those guys credit. I give the officials credit because they are constantly training new officials, constantly recruiting them. It's a year-round process, you know. The Mhsaa'a has held a clinic, you know, a new officials clinic every year since I've been here. Actually two, one in Lansing and one in Grand Rapids. And then down in the Detroit area, the association down there does it. So that's been an ongoing challenge. I firmly believe that we should have 3 officials on a game. You know, they got sticks out there and they're wearing helmets, and that's a lot of turf to cover. So it's really a problem, you know, with the shortage.
And you can hit people legally. I mean, that's part of the
Well,
process.
and that's the thing about lacrosse. And my weakest suit in this sport is knowledge of the rules. That's my weakest point. Administratively, I'm pretty good, but I'm not as good on the rules as I should be. So I know that, and I'm not afraid to seek counsel from people who know it. I admit my shortcomings there. But what's unusual about in basketball, if I bump into you, dang it, that's a foul. You know, and the referee not calling it's because, well, that wasn't a bad foul. But in lacrosse, I can hit you, I can check you. There's things that I can do with random physical contact that are legal. And there's things that you can do under physical contact that are not legal. So first the official has to distinguish, is that legal or not? And then is it a penalty or not? And then they even go so far as how many minutes is it going to be? You know, and this year they've changed one of the rules to say that it's 3 minutes automatic non-releasable, you know, if it's targeting or hit to the head. To me, they should take some of the judgment. It's really a hard sport to officiate, in my opinion. And I think our officials do a pretty good job. I wish that our coaches were, you know, there's a number of coaches that I think need to take a shot of sportsmanship, you know, but I can't say it's any worse in lacrosse than it is in others, except, you know, it's an interesting phenomenon. The more non-school activity you have, the more problems you got to solve in the school realm. You know, hockey, for instance, was played outside. It's played so much outside of school that it's really tough to get hockey coaches in line because they're used to being in these rinks and being jerks with officials. You know, so many of our sports are played in the school setting that You know, you're able to have that good sporting behavior by kids and parents when they come up. But when the non-school activity often doesn't have the good kind of sportsmanship that you want, and there's things that a lot of non-school lacrosse that set bad habits, you know, for school lacrosse.
From your perch as administrator of this sport for the high schools, do you see travel lacrosse affecting it the way it, in the next 5 years, the way it may have done already with soccer, already with hockey?
Well, I think it's a negative. I think this drive for college scholarships that sends people all over the world.
Right.
I think the one thing that probably lacrosse has that others don't is it's such a money-driven enterprise, the non-school lacrosse. The amount of money that parents are paying for this stuff is absurd. It's probably likened only to club volleyball, which if you had a daughter who played high school volleyball and she wanted to be decent, she'd have to play club volleyball. And it's a fortune what they charge these people for that. So I think it's usury in the amount of money that they're getting. I think it's individuals profiteering off of it. And they're doing it often on the guys that, well, there's going to be college coaches out there.
I've had two for-profit teams call me recently looking for spring games, which has sort of been a line of demarcation that, you know, they 1st of March they don't talk to kids, and then the 1st of June comes up and their season is June through, you know, the end of February, and now they're starting to sort of filtrate back into some levels of high school lacrosse and kind of point out to them that I can't play a club team. I can't.
Well, actually, under our rules, MHSAA member school can play a non-school team in every sport but football. My problem is
I wouldn't play it.
I wouldn't, because you know, what are you going to do if a fight breaks out? What are you going to do if somebody goes nuts and hurts one of your kids? Who are you going to call? You have no administrator. You have no school behind it. Don't call me, because it's not an MHSAA school.
Right.
You know. Now, early on in our years, we had a number of non-school teams that were there because there wasn't a school team in town. You know, before Macomb, Dakota, and Chippewa Valley, you know, before they had a lacrosse team, I think it was a Motor City. What was the name of the team out there? You know, and there were a number of, you know, wannabes that weren't, schools were recognizing them. And I would have a lot of conversations with them. I'd say, well, you know, keep going, and what you want to do is follow all of our rules until the time when you become a school team. Then it's going to be real easy. And other schools will play you because you're following the same rules, you're showing the same respect, you make sure your kids are at the very top of the game in sportsmanship so that people aren't afraid to play.
Some of the unifications, when it was the Mhsla, there used to be Eisenhower, Sterling Heights, Stevenson, and I believe there were 4 high schools together with a collective enrollment of 14,000, something in that ballpark, which obviously wasn't acceptable by MHSA standards, but they talk now about maybe this school, they should break up the combinations, but I keep going back to the old days when, well, guys, if you think unification is huge, it's not, because there used to be a school with 14,000.
One of the programs that I administer here is the MHSAA cooperative programs, which we have a number of schools in lacrosse that have cooperative programs. Every so often I hear somebody say that they're a problem. First of all, the combined enrollment is 3,500 students, which is like our largest school. So nobody can have a cooperative program that's larger than the largest school. A number of programs started as cooperative programs and have since split off. The schools you mentioned in the Warren Consolidated Schools, the Walled Lake Schools, the Plymouth Schools. Those guys all started off as 3-team co-ops, and before their 3-year, they had a 3-year window, they split, and they had 3 separate teams. So we've had tremendous growth because of that. And then the other thing, there are a number of teams that wouldn't exist if you wouldn't let them combine. You know, you have 10 kids at one school, 10 at another, you can combine. You got 10 kids alone at one school, you'll have no lacrosse. So it's really helped to increase participation. And people need to know these cooperative agreements they must be renewed every 2 years.
Right.
They must have their league approve them every 2 years. They must have our executive committee approve them every 2 years. So if somebody's in there kicking butt, and they're 20-0, and it's like, wait a minute, we better find out what's going on. Or they're cutting kids.
Right. Well, but the other side of that knife is also there. I believe there's a swim program up in the Keweenaw Peninsula where there's one school with a pool, and there's like 5 or 6 schools together, but collectively their enrollment's like 500.
Yes.
So it's the other side of the coin where you do get kids an opportunity to swim where they might not have otherwise.
And cooperative programs aren't meant for 1 or 2 kids, but some of them exist for that. And you're right. In sports not sponsored by 250 schools, this would be swimming, gymnastics, lacrosse, hockey, skiing. In those sports, you can combine enrollments of any number of schools to up to 3,500. So it has helped grow it. Occasionally somebody will say, well, why do they have, they should be able to have 2 teams. And we look at what they cut, what's there, and, we've had schools that have been communicated with us, say, you guys are going to have to see, we're going to need to know why you can't be at 2 teams here. So it's got a lot of positives, far more positives than negative. And it's not left alone.
You are the only school administrator in the Hall of Fame for the High School Lacrosse Coaches Association. You've mentioned that you're an unworthy candidate for that position, but obviously the coaches in the sport must have thought you've done well. Do you realize how much you are respected? I mean,
well, I really have the best job in the history of jobs. I'm a history teacher and a gym teacher and an athletic director. I never played a day of sports in my life. I was a student manager for 4 years in high school, plus the 8th grade. And here I am, God bless, through the grace of God, in this line of work. And the people that I deal with all day long, even crazy lacrosse coaches, are really good people. And it's just an exciting thing. So I believe we have good relationships, even when there's turmoil, even when there's controversy. I hope that people see that we're trying to be fair and we're doing the right thing. A lot of times, you have to speak for the school, not in the room. The school that might be on the other end of the decisions that you make, and that's always a challenge. But if you've been in this line of work, you as an official, I knew you back when you were coaching at Borges and umpiring. And it's kind of a neat spot to be in school sports. The people around, and like I said, my biggest regret is that I don't work in a school anymore. I was pretty good at a school, and it's been 30 years since but somebody's got to do this. So hopefully I never forget, and hopefully people who know me will tell me when I do forget. Say, hey, remember what you're supposed to be like and where you're from.
I guess as a last question, what do you see at the moment? I'm assuming you're nearing semi-retirement or retirement at some point, but what do you see over the next 5 years?
For lacrosse.
For lacrosse? Or for you?
Well, I have nothing else to do, so I'm 63. I'll be around for a little while. We just had our director, Jack Roberts, retire, who is one of the finest men I know. And our new director, Mark Ewell, is a great guy. He's going to be around for 20-some years. So I hope to give him, handful more of years. It's a desk job, I mean? I don't have to, except for, they pay me a lot of money to talk and type is what I tell people. I think, I don't know if anybody will watch the end of this tape, but I think we'll probably end up with 3 divisions in lacrosse in not the far off future.
And that's actually been worked on by the committee, by the coaches.
I guess the Coach Association has something there. I think the dilemma with 3 divisions, and I've told these guys, is that you kind of have to fit the model of the other sports. You got to look at hockey with 150 some teams. They're at 3 divisions. I mean, we have 760 basketball teams, 4 divisions, 600 baseball and softball teams, 4 divisions. So you're pushed to 3 divisions in lacrosse, and this is a council of administrators, coaches, principals. They're going to look at it and say, wait a minute. How can we justify that given these numbers? So, I think someday it will happen, but the look, what people are going to see is that when you start dividing differently, You know, I opened up the interview talking about the small number of teams that have won. You know, you're just going to put those teams in the top of Division II, another one of those teams top of Division III. So we ain't going to hand out more state championship trophies, different state championship trophies necessarily. You know, that's why I'm glad that our current structure that has more regional champions allows for schools to experience that. You know, I get a little nervous about the non-school growth. I really think that the hope that I have for the future is that boys lacrosse will be like other sports and will be sponsored by middle schools. That to me is what will help to grow it and grow it appropriately. Let's put that school funding that we put into baseball and basketball and football, let's put that into lacrosse and have them connected to the middle school. That will help to grow the sport appropriately in the high school. So that's something that I hope for. I don't know if I see that coming, but I hope for that.
Well, I appreciate all the time you've spent with us, and I really appreciate your fairness over the years, and you've been a big integral part of Michigan High School lacrosse, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg. You too. Glad you're in this sport. Who would think after all these years we're back in the same line of work?